Hello, friends. I am Oleg Shleyamovich, the CEO of CAS.AI. And today I want to discuss what happens after we have the initial release of a game that seems successful to us and exactly what to do next, how to scale it, and the specific requirements for that. There are always two classic options, either self-publishing or publishing with colleagues. In other words, with publishers, whether that's with our competitors. And now we'll examine the details right now. We'll take a look at the 2025 market, what has happened, what will happen, and where it's all heading. If you want to scale up and get published, go to the CAS.AI website and fill out the publishing application form. If you just want to monetize your game, go to the CAS.AI website and fill out the mediation form. What do we want to do if we have a game that's not on Roblox, just a good, high-quality game? We want to generate a significant profit with it. Now let us take a much closer look at exactly what happened throughout the year 2025 in the competitive field of mobile game releases. To be more specific about these figures, tens of thousands of different projects were released, but out of every 100 games launched, at most only one ever reaches the revenue mark of $10,000 per month from app purchases and ads. If we're talking about any kind of success, meaning being able to support a studio and make a profit, that number is $30,000 a month, and in that case, the odds are worse than 1 in 300. If we're sincerely hoping and aiming not even for a mythical unicorn, but just for a solid, reliable, successful project, then the actual odds are 1 in 1,000 or perhaps even less. That's as far as indie is concerned. With publishers, the numbers are different. We have seen, yes, that the odds are 1 in 100 of reaching the $10,000 mark. If you have successfully passed the publisher's initial evaluation tests, then your chances of reaching $30,000 in total revenue are about 1 in 10. Obviously, that's still far from 100%, but the chances increase dramatically. If you're hoping to get a hit, then the odds, again, are actually quite real, 1 in 50. That's a far cry from 1 in 1,500 or 2,000. So it is entirely within the realm of possibility, but that is only if you are working with a truly competent publisher. Because in this specific case, the partnership becomes a valuable opportunity where each side effectively leverages its strengths and capabilities. So why do indie developers struggle with self-publishing? In reality, there are several reasons. Reason number one is a limited budget. Yes, we live in the modern world and we understand that money talks. And if 90% of developers don't have a marketing budget of more than $3,000 per month, you won't achieve large-scale user acquisition or a massive influx of users. After all, ASO and organic traffic will get you 2, 3, or maybe 500 users a day, which is not nearly enough to reach the break-even point. And this doesn't provide us with the real opportunity to scale. The second reason is that you're really in a blind spot. That is, you don't have proper analytics. Indie developers can use analytics, but it's usually Google Analytics or Game Analytics, maybe something else. But even there aren't any full-fledged predictive tools. Without predictive tools, user acquisition is impossible. How does user acquisition work? We buy users and have to estimate that they will bring us, say, 150% of their CPI by the 200th day. But no one among the big players waits until the 200th day to see whether the acquisition will pay off. All major publishers and agencies have special prediction modules, and these very predictions help to use the budget effectively, acquire users profitably, not at a loss, correct? This is also kind of like rocket science, but actually it's not rocket science, it's just our reality. Our reality is that if an indie developer starts spending $20,000 a month without proper marketing strategies and tools, then after a few months, that money will turn into 15, then 10, then 8, 7, 5, and eventually 0. Without proper marketing analytics, it is impossible to survive in today's world. And probably one of the most important reasons is the small differences that kill. In English, it sounds perfect. Small gaps that kill. When you watch horse races at the racetrack, for example, or Formula One races, which is probably a more familiar example for us, it doesn't matter by how much the second driver lags behind the first. Unfortunately, he's still second, and the first is still the winner. And it doesn't matter whether he beat his opponent by 500 meters or they finished in a photo finish, it's still first and second place. This is where we see that indie developers, simply because they lack large creative departments, always have a CPI that's 10 to 20% higher on a comparable budget, and their ARPDAU accordingly will always be about 10% lower with standard settings. This, in turn, leads to the fact that publishers and developers face completely different scales of problems. Subscribe to the CAS.AI channel and hit the bell so you don't miss monetization strategies and case studies from the world of mobile games. So let's take a look at what makes up our CPI. Networks, when they advertise, are selling us impressions, not installs. All advertisers compete in a single blind auction through the networks, offering a certain eCPM. What happens on the publisher side? The publisher has a large team of motion designers who create tons of creatives in search of a high CTR. In our team, for example, there are up to 40 people in the UA department. Most of them are buyers whose primary and main responsibility is to constantly create and produce videos from morning until night. That's their job. They make videos for games and suddenly come across what's called a bench. What really works best? What has a high click-through rate? At that moment, the cost, the spend on advertising campaigns start to increase exponentially. Secondly, there's the work of the ASO team. They constantly run A/B tests on screens, videos, and text, which ultimately lead to a higher page conversion rate. A high page conversion rate, when combined with a higher CTR, will result in significantly more competitive bids in terms of CPI. In other words, one game has a 6% conversion rate and a 20% CTR. That is the reality for an indie developer. Meanwhile, a publisher might see a 7% conversion rate and a 22% CTR. In both scenarios, these percentages ultimately enable the publisher to win the same auction, simply because of a lower CPI. They will have a lower CPI but a higher eCPM, which will secure them the impression. As a result, indie developers end up paying more for the same screen time, for the same number of impressions. Now let's talk about LTV. The LTV formula is quite simple. LTV on the nth day, or ARPU, is the average revenue per daily active user multiplied by the number of game days that this person has played your game. What happens on the publisher side? We as publishers have a stronger mediation stack, establishing direct contracts with ad networks that allow them to receive a variety of very specific advantages. And probably the most important thing, the major industry players have algorithmic optimizations for waterfalls. As a direct result, ARPDAU will be 5, 10, 15, or even 20% significantly higher on the same traffic for a very similar product. So to wrap things up, we have a significantly higher CPI and more advanced monetization technologies. Indie developers by default have a higher CPI and a slightly lower ARPDAU. So there's only one area left where an indie developer can compete with a publisher, namely product quality, engagement, and retention. And since we already have a 10% difference in CPI and a 10% difference in ARPDAU, we need a substantial 23% increase in engagement just to be on the same playing field as a publisher. That is, by default, an indie developer's engagement needs to be at least 20% better. You might say that 20% is not a lot, but you won't actually achieve it right from the start. Here is a basic game. It has been released, and now since we live in the real world, we understand it needs improvement. And from our own experience, we know that on average, we consider a good update to be one that gives a 5% increase. Let's talk about a 4 to 6% overall increase, whether in monetization or user engagement. The success rate in reality for an indie developer is usually roughly 1 out of every 10. And for a publisher, let's say it's 1 out of 8. That's a rate of about 12%. Taking this into account, we need to achieve 4 or 5 successful updates, which in turn means 25 to 40 attempts. And if we say that an update is released every 2 weeks, that gives us a full 18 months of development. Unfortunately, most independent development teams cannot survive that. They don't have the finances to sustain 18 months of development. This is our reality. So now let's take a look at A/B tests. To ensure we provide high-quality updates, we need 2,000 to 5,000 users in each cohort over a short period. That is to give you a rough estimate, roughly 6,000 users in total. If an indie studio has a weak UA team, and usually they do, then these 6,000 users might end up costing them, let's say, $2,000. Not everyone has those $2,000. As a result, these tests start to get stretched out over time. The more drawn out a test is, the less relevant the results will be. On the other hand, a proper publisher can easily bring in those 6,000 users at 5, 6, or 8 cents per user, and it won't be a big problem. This process will take 2 days, maybe 3 days. If there's no rush, 4 days. In that case, the cost per user may drop from 5 cents to 4 cents. In addition, when you work with a publisher, you get the advantage of a fresh perspective. Now, colleagues, it's really no secret. If you've been working on a game for 6, 8, 10, or even 12 months, some mistakes simply stop seeming like mistakes to you. They actually start to feel completely normal. That is precisely the reason why publishers frequently bring in product owners or game designers from external agencies or even from their own side to take a fresh look at the product and point out any potential flaws or underlying weaknesses. As a rule, in this case, 10 to 20 competing games are reviewed. A list is made of 3, 5, or 10 main bugs and up to 10 high-priority features that need to be implemented within the next 6 months or so. Each of these features should, in theory, increase at least one of the key metrics by a few percent: monetization, ARPU, short-term retention rate, or long-term retention rate. And this in turn significantly boosts the likelihood of success to about 20 to 25%, compared to 10 to 12% in standard industry scenarios when indie teams are working on the project. As a result, we get a much more reliable and predictable growth in much shorter time iterations and much shorter time intervals. From time to time, you can even test the game without implementing any game mechanics. It's enough to simply reach out and ask the publisher to produce a specific promotional video, showcasing a new hero, a new meta, or even a new mode without fully implementing it in the code. Then you hand this over to the user acquisition team and marketing and monitor the key user acquisition metrics. If your CPI drops or your IPM, installs per 1,000 impressions, increases, it means the idea is working, users like it, and it can be implemented safely. If you see it fail the user acquisition test, it essentially indicates there is no reason to implement it in 80% of cases. And you've saved time and money. In this way, we've minimized the risks. Even so, why aren't publishers currently lining up to work with indie developers? First of all, it's likely because of the KPIs. We, as publishers, are quite strict about the products that come to us. And if a product doesn't have, say, a day one retention rate of 40%, then, as a rule, that developer gets rejected. Secondly, major players say, guys, let's do it this way. 70-30, 80-20, 90-10. And all of that goes in favor of the publisher. As you might expect, indie developers are understandably far from thrilled about such an unfair distribution of revenue. Sometimes publishers insist on pushing their own vision, which ultimately destroys the core ideals of the game. The personal ideals that the developer put into the game, it's true, this happens because if a developer is making their ultimate dream game, that dream game isn't a way to make money. We, as publishers, tend to view any game as a way to make money. That is, we invest $100,000 to get $130,000 after N months. Finally, it's often about the ownership of the IP. Publishers require that the IP rights be transferred to them from the developers. This often makes publishing contracts very unsafe. While some of these fears are real and some are not, this is exactly what prevents most independent studios that are still trying to do self-publishing from working with a publisher as such. However, with the right publisher, many of these risks can effectively be reduced to nearly zero. Now, I'll talk a little about us, about what's happening at CAS.AI. Naturally, we handle the full cycle of user acquisition. We have analytics, predictive modeling, app store optimization, creatives, and monetization. We always offer strategic advice, but in some cases, we also provide hands-on help with game vision and game design. Furthermore, our model is not a 50-50 revenue share, but an uplift share. So, if you bring us a game that earns $10,000 a month, we say, okay, the $10,000 are yours, and everything we earn together above that is split 50-50. We are ready to take on any games with any metrics. The main thing is that we believe this game can reasonably reach a profit threshold of 15 to 20,000 within the next 6 months to a year. And accordingly, we manage everything related to growth while the developer handles everything related to the product, focusing on improving metrics and monetization. Let's look at some specific examples. We have an example, Multicraft. This is a developer who's worked with us and still works with us. The game on our mediation platform grew from 40,000 to 60,000 over 2 years, but in September of 2025, it experienced an organic drop. That is, organic traffic fell and revenue dropped to $40,000 per month. The team switched to full publishing, conducted a complete audit, made quick targeted changes, and saw ARPU increase by up to 70% in some countries. And as a result, by November, we had already reached 70,000. We understand where to go and what to do, and I think that even 100,000 is not far off. So, the team launched the game in November 2024. This was actually one of the most successful indie launches. They came to us with revenue of $70,000 per month from organic traffic. In November, we hit 190,000. In December, we didn't quite reach 200, and in January, of course, we didn't make it either. But I think that by next November or December, we'll get to 200 or even 250,000. The guys decided to make a game about a supervillain, superhero crime open world war. In this case, we fully funded the development because we knew these guys and we worked with them. So right from the start, we said, since we're funding the development, we'll take 80% of the profits precisely because we funded the entire project. Right now, this game is making slightly less than 20,000 a month, and we expect it to hit 50,000 in 6 months. We shouldn't forget about buyout options. Not every publisher offers this. If we find the game interesting, we can simply buy it out for 1.5 years worth of average monthly profit. But this only happens if the developer themselves wants it. If the developer wants to keep earning, we actually like this option even more. If you want to monetize your game right away, quickly, with 15 ad networks, go to the CAS.AI website and fill out the form, and we'll help you with this very quickly. Friends, don't forget to subscribe, like, and ask questions. If needed, I'll share the links. Good luck to everyone. Bye-bye. Subscribe to the CAS.AI channel and hit the bell so you don't miss monetization strategies and case studies from the world of mobile games.